Good evening, everybody. It's Thursday, so you know it's time for our Facebook Live. And we continue to try to bring on guests to educate you all to make the best decisions possible. Knowledge is power, and I strongly believe in helping you all get the tools to succeed and to empower each other. Today's topic is going to be for catered to business owners and employees, as the COVID pandemic has kind of turned a lot of people's work or jobs or businesses upside down. So we have somebody here who is going to talk to us about what can and can't be done, and I think has a lot of incredible knowledge that's pretty priceless for any business owner or employee during this time. But before we get started, just a few quick reminders. I'm going to ask you guys every week, please go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube if you can, and subscribe to our newsletter. We received some incredible feedback from some of you this past week about our Facebook Live. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Mujahid. She brought us Syrian menaish today, so we've been eating that. So that for me today is going to be the good news to share with you all from Mubarak Law. And also, we just started offering retirement plans for our employees. You know, the Mubarak Law team works so hard for everybody. And today we have officially started with an IRA for each of our employees. So I'm happy to do that. So today's guest is Jordan Ostroff. I met Jordan because every person in Orlando or attorney probably knows Jordan Ostroff. And I've seen him on social media, incredibly active. And he was gracious enough to invite me to a Magic game, and really just to kind of, as one law firm owner to the other, shed some advice. And without further ado, I would like to bring on Jordan. And I hope everybody can welcome Jordan. And if you guys have questions for us on our topics, I'm sure he's happy to take them. So welcome, Jordan.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love that you phrase it as all the attorneys know me, not necessarily like me. So
yeah, it's very specific. You know, I chose my words carefully there. No, but people always say good things. And as I mentioned, Jordan he's a good networker. And if you need to find an attorney or any type of business, he could probably lead you in the right direction. And he's a great source of knowledge. So today's, Jordan, we're going to talk about obviously COVID-19, but a little bit get away from news and statistics and numbers, but talk about what rights do employers have. And before we get into that, I'm sorry if I didn't mention that you also have a marketing company that's caters specifically to attorneys. So as I mentioned, everybody knows Jordan, who's an attorney, and it probably has much to do with his incredible marketing skills. So if you're an attorney and you're joining us tonight, please follow his Legalese Facebook and YouTube account. And he has multiple shows, I think a week. Is that right?
So for Jordan Law, we do multiple a week. For Legalese marketing, we do 1 or 2 a month.
Okay. And then Jordan Law, at your firm, you guys handle, I know, business, PI. Is there anything else I'm not familiar with?
We do quite a bit of professional licensing defense. Normally that's related to business law, but like realtors, doctors, nurses, and even, barbers have to have professional licensing. And so a lot of times the businesses will have issues getting them or helping their employees keep those licenses. And so we'll do that work as well.
Okay. So tonight's topic is going to be about business law, kind of, and employers and employees' rights. So I know you have a wealth of knowledge to share with everybody. Where do you want to start as far as how has COVID changed the work environment?
So the easiest place to start is from the employer perspective. And really, COVID hasn't changed the employer's requirements to their employees other than in one spot. So as an employer, you have to provide a safe workplace that's under the OSHA requirements. What that really means, that's going to be different in every situation. Obviously during coronavirus, that's going to probably include CDC guidelines or pretty close to it as it relates to keeping your employees, 6 feet apart from each other, having masks, hand sanitizer, etc. But there hasn't been any specific inner office additions that we put on business owners during coronavirus.
Okay, so for business owners who are dealing with this, and I'm curious, and I'm going to just jump to it. Your employee tests positive for COVID-19. What is, the first thing an employer should do when they receive this information?
So the first thing that I think the employer should do would be getting that person out of the office and getting that person away from the rest of the office. That's going to be the biggest immediate need. That's not a definitive specific requirement, but again, if you have somebody at your office who you know is COVID positive and you have them around other people, then you're not following that OSHA requirement of having a safe workplace. So that would be step one.
So that's where we're going to keep the workplace safe and remove the possible COVID-19 positive test result and have them out of the work site to prevent other people from being infected. What happens to that employee when they are told to stay home, and what responsibilities does the employer have to pay these particular individuals?
So from that standpoint, before coronavirus, in a situation like this, the requirement on the employer would be nothing. Like for Florida, we are an at-will state, and being sick is not necessarily, it's not a protected class, race, ethnicity, etc. So prior to coronavirus, for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, you could just fire that employee if they contracted some sort of illness, as long as it wasn't a disability. However, the government saw fit to pass the the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. So this came out right before the CARES Act, right before the PPP loans and all those. And that put an affirmative requirement on employers to maintain the job of employees and to pay them a certain amount based upon if they have coronavirus, if they're waiting for a test, if they have to be under a quarantine, if they have to care for a family member or child because of coronavirus, or if they have to care for a child because of schools being closed and be, some other reason to have to watch their children, you are now mandated to keep them on and pay them, depending upon the reasoning, depends upon how much you have to pay them and for how long.
So do you know if this affects even part-time employees, or is this limited to full-time employees, or just anybody who works for the company?
So that's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that. So I don't want to speculate. Basically, if you look at it, we have FMLA, so the Federal Medical Leave Act, and so that applied to large-scale businesses. This put a lot of those requirements on smaller businesses. The FMLA stuff, for the most part, applies to only full-time workers, but I don't know off the top of my head from the coronavirus one.
And then does your own employee handbook or guide, does that kind of dictate at all as to how to treat an employee?
So if you are providing your staff more than that, like if you already have an existing sick leave plan or something like that provides more than the Family First Coronavirus Act, you're probably going to have to still follow that. But I haven't seen any that have that for just, regular illnesses. So at that point, you're going to have to come up to honoring that act, which would be keeping people on for, as little as 8 weeks, getting farther than that, and paying them a minimum of 50%. In some situations, having to pay them 60% or 2/3.
For everybody who's watching, I mean, obviously these have been like massive bills and acts that have passed. So it's completely very nuanced and detailed, probably depending on company size or hours, that dictate how many weeks you have to pay a particular individual. So if you do have a company and one of your employees tests positive, you should probably contact an attorney like Jordan or another employment attorney to make sure that you are complying. Because what are there consequences for not paying your employee if you don't comply?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I mean, you've got a wage and hour dispute. And the other thing that we've seen, so I guess let me back up for a second. So we are a business law firm. So we're representing the businesses in these perspectives. But what we've seen, thankfully not for any of our clients, but talking with other attorneys, there have been a bunch of plaintiffs' attorneys and employment lawyers that have had the coronavirus issue for a client, but then also investigated the business and also found a wage and hour issue, and also found out that they weren't reimbursing mileage correctly, and also found out, 3 or 4 other potential lawsuits. And so because this business owner, didn't want to pay somebody half pay for 8 weeks, they're now facing, 6 different lawsuits, one of which involves literally every single worker at the place for them being underpaid.
You could literally open Pandora's box, just like an audit might lead to all sorts of discoveries and violations you're not even sure are aware of. How can an employer get ahead of knowing what to do and not be in a reactionary position, but to plan? Obviously, this is something we're going to be dealing with for some time. What is your suggestion for employers?
So I always like, from the employer perspective, we're going back to that safe workplace. And so for a lot of people, that's going to be mandating masks in the office. That's going to be having professional cleaning come in. That's going to be having hand sanitizer available. That's going to be spacing employees out. If you've got, a bunch of people crammed together in cubicles, you may have to stagger them coming into the office or move them around. But I tell employers the easiest thing to do after those things is make sure that your office can run virtually. That's going to help you legally, and that's going to help you from a business perspective. Because, if God forbid we have to lock down again, or if this comes back next year or something along those lines, you're going to want to utilize this time now to make sure that your business is going to be able to operate cloud-based to the extent that it can. Obviously, as we saw.
That's really important. So regardless if you're a law firm or your business, you need to make sure you have online and virtual capabilities. We, for the American Immigration Lawyers Association, we had to do a webinar to teach many attorneys on how to work from home or how to work remotely. Thankfully, we had the software at Mubarak Law. Jordan has all sorts of incredible software at his firm, where for us, we don't really skip a beat, and you should do the same for your own business. And if it's not for COVID-19 or, maybe it's a hurricane, you can continue to maintain your business and get ahead of it. So that's, I think, a great piece of advice that you're mentioned there. And do you guys, I mentioned the handbook, and I know I didn't have one. My firm has been around for 4+ years, and we got one maybe about a year and a half ago. Is that something that your firm can do?
Yeah, we work with a lot of businesses to put a handbook in place or update a handbook that hasn't been looked at in 15 years. But just remember, the one thing I caution people is an employee handbook is really just a piece of paper or a virtual document. If you're not making sure that it's up to date, if you're not making sure that it's complying with current law, and if you're not training people and actually implementing it, it's not going to be as helpful. It's nice to have a policy on no sexual harassment or non-discrimination, but it's another thing to actually make sure that that policy is followed in the office. And that's where, you can get a bunch of lawsuits or unhappy workers or, all that from not following the handbook that you did spend the time and effort to put in place.
So I want to come back to the hypothetical of your employee test positive. What obligation do you have to the other employees who may have been exposed to the virus? And what are some, what I call a minefield? How do you navigate that minefield of what you can and can't do as an employer?
So it would sound like, we get the person out of the office, we schedule a cleaning crew, we have everybody else go and get tested, we let them know what happened, would be the right thing to do. However, unfortunately, you could be violating your employees' HIPAA rights by telling the other employees. So if you tell everybody that, hey, Jane Doe or John Smith just got COVID, so anybody who's been around them needs to go get tested, you have now violated HIPAA requirements. So instead, you have to be kind of circumspect about it and just tell them, we believe you've come in contact with somebody who's tested positive, or with somebody who's had family members test positive, or who's been in contact with somebody with COVID. And we suggest that you, stay home. If that's what it goes back to being virtual, being able to have people work from home, have people go get tested, figure out what's going on. And then I would suggest to follow what the NBA is doing, which is they're not letting people back in the bubble until they've tested positive twice in 24 hours. Good luck necessarily getting to COVID tests 24 hours apart, but in a best case scenario, that would be a wonderful way to do it. So that way you're minimizing the ability to have an improper positive or improper negative.
Or even getting test results in less than a week's time. So you mentioned, this safe harbor or the safe environment. Does that extend to people's clients and customers? I'm sorry if I didn't ask you this before, but do you have an obligation to clients or customers who may have been exposed to COVID-19?
So not from an OSHA standpoint, because OSHA is set up for the safety of employees, but ultimately, I mean, you could have a general liability issue. Absolutely. You know, if you knowingly had an employee in the office, and if you knowingly had them come in contact with a bunch of clients, you could be in theory held responsible for, you know, the damage, the harm, whether that's them missing work, whether that's them having millions of dollars in medical bills, whether that's them having them unfortunately pass away. You could be responsible for that. Now, obviously, it's going to be difficult to prove where somebody got it. It's going to be difficult. You know, there's a number of issues that would come up, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you know somebody tested positive to then, you know, maybe in your next email letter or try to track down the clients that had been in the office and reach out to them and just say, hey, one of our employees has tested positive. You know, in an abundance of caution, we just want to let you know, something along those lines. And I think in a lot of instances, you'll build goodwill with clients, you know, taking that step if, God forbid, you know, you do have to make that call.
Jordan, you were a good resource for many business owners when PPP was happening and all these things. Are you staying up to speed on the proposed legislation in the Senate? So the reason I asked that is because I think they mentioned they want to try to have like a 5-year safe harbor for like COVID lawsuits. Is that something that would fall into this liability that you're talking about?
To some extent, yes. I mean, look, on the one hand, the government rushed the CARES Act. On the other hand, they had to. I mean, this was a situation where we had, you know, millions and millions and millions of people and their businesses get impacted by this from a financial standpoint, from a health standpoint, from all those things. And so we're going to see quite a bit of legislation have to come out of this, you know, running the gamut of maybe another round of PPP loans, running the gamut of how are we going to deal with business interruption insurance for coronavirus, if it's covered, if it's not, how it relates to people testing positive for COVID and getting injured and who's going to bear the brunt of that. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of things that will come out of this. And, you know, we're just going to have to kind of wait and sit back and see what happens. Because I can tell you right now, from just the PPP forgiveness issues, I mean, that's been, you know, 27 different things from the SBA. Every day, every week it changes. And they've actually changed it in the benefit of the businesses once already to make it less money that has to be spent towards payroll, to make it a longer time that you can spend the money to be forgiven, etc. So
some proposals about certain amounts of PPP, people are suggesting if it was less than a certain amount, perhaps to do an automatic forgiveness so that the employers don't have to go through the process of loan forgiveness. And who knows, you know, for some of these smaller loan amounts, is that going to be worth the government resources and things, especially if people maintained their employees and their payroll, and that's something pretty clear to track.
Yeah, so they're talking about it from the $150,000 threshold. The other thing that's going to be really interesting is, so, you know, we've extended it. Originally, it was supposed to be 8 weeks. We've extended it to 24 weeks. Well, what happens from a tax standpoint? Let's say you got a $149,000 PPP loan, and that's going to get forgiven. Well, you might have to pay, you know, if you get it forgiven next year, you have a liability for this year, but you have the benefit for next year. And so there's going to be some interesting things that would have to happen to kind of do the accounting that would be much cleaner if everything gets forgiven or not in this year.
Okay, so I just want to recap for anybody who's joined us after we got started. We are here with attorney Jordan Ostroff, and he's providing us with some information regarding to what an employer should do in the era of COVID, and that includes complying with the Family First and the CARES Act and making sure any employees who are eligible to be paid and who are out of work because of COVID, you don't want to open yourself up to liability. But it's not just about the companies. So what employee rights, I guess they're going to be intertwined. So what do you suggest for employees who are going back to work right now, and what should they be aware of as to what their rights are?
So here's the problem in Florida. You know, we are an at-will work state. There are a number of unions in Florida, but not so many. So for the most part, employees don't have that many rights. I mean, you know, you have the right to be treated properly. You have the right to not be discriminated against or fired based upon your age, your gender, your race, your ethnicity, etc. But in terms of having actual rights, you don't have that many. So the issue here is you have the benefit of that protection from that Family First Act when it comes to needing to not be at work or needing to stay home to care for especially children with the school issue. which I know is a huge thing weighing on so many parents' minds. And I totally understand and commiserate as much as possible on those. But from the employee standpoint, I mean, you have to make the decision. If you're ordered back to work, if you don't have to stay home for your kids, if you don't have a potentially positive test, if you don't have to be quarantined and you don't feel comfortable going back to work, you have the right not to go back, but they also have the right to fire you for that. So it's a balancing test, which goes back to, the age old wisdom. A lot of the need for a lawyer can be solved by two people having a genuine conversation and having respect for each other and coming up with some sort of an agreement, because an employee and a business owner can agree to anything that doesn't violate federal law, whether that's, we'll hold your job open for 4 months, whether that's you work 1 day a week and we'll pay you for that, whether it's, we'll pay you your normal salary and work 2 days a week. I mean, whatever it's going to be, you can make all those agreements to make the situation better for your employees. You just can't violate that Family First Act to make it worse.
You bring up a good point, like having an agreement in place. And I'm sure you deal with a lot of businesses. What are some of the craziest things you've seen when a large company either has a contract or doesn't have a contract in place? And how can our viewers learn from that and perhaps, prevent themselves from having disputes in the future?
So the most relevant and interesting one right now is not between an employer and an employee, but between a business that has business interruption insurance. And so that's something that you can purchase that will cover your business if you have a certain amount of financial hit. And the interesting thing right now is most of those require physical damage. So for Florida, a ton of our clients out in, Brevard and Volusia have those for hurricanes, have those for flooding, have those for, tornadoes and whatnot. They don't have them for a virus. And so there are some plans that specifically say they do cover a virus. There are some that specifically say they don't cover. There are some that specifically require physical damage to the building. There are some that include, if you are ordered to be closed by the government, that's included in business interruption insurance. And
there's a lot of attorneys. I'm sorry, I'll finish that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting in a negative way to see how those play out, because even if you do end up getting paid, I think you're going to end up getting so much more litigation and get paid so much slower. Whereas, a hurricane goes through, knocks all the businesses away in that area, and you may get paid in 30 days because they know they have to cut that check for everybody.
Business interruption is like money you need now, right? And for a lot of these businesses, I know that there's a lot of law firms who do first party insurance claims that will review your policy to see if there's anything to do free. Like our mutual friend, attorney Imran Malik, is reviewing these kind of policies at Malik Law. So if you do have business interruption, I'm sure maybe even Jordan's office, that's something that they can assist you with that. Jordan, you also have a business partner, and it's your wife, and she's also an attorney. So which leads me to my question about people who do business together, even with family. I know I see it all the time with my clients, and I tell them that it's more important than ever to have an agreement. And what is your position on that?
Well, I mean, specifically, my wife knows that if she wants to divorce me, she should just murder me instead. It's, faster, cheaper, and she'll be happier at the end of it. But no, all jokes aside, I think, we get into things with the best of intentions, whether that's a marriage, whether that's a business, whether that's whatever it's going to be. And those don't always play out. And so I suggest, even if you're going into business with your parents, with your kid, with your brother, with your cousin, you still want to have the same documents in place as if you're not related to that person, just because why not? At the end of the day, a lot of what we do with that contract is just like having insurance. You're buying peace of mind. And so if there's never a problem in the business and you never have to really litigate that employment agreement, then great. But the minute you do, it's going to be worth, 10 times what you paid for it, not having to go back and reinvent the wheel and discuss every single
losing the familial or friendship that's there, because it's easy to forget what people agree to on a handshake. But if you have a document that everybody can go back and refer to, I think it helps avoid a lot of problems in the future and like any clarity or misinterpretations.
Yeah, and the best thing, I don't require them, but what we try to put in all of them is a prevailing parties provision. So if there is litigation, whoever wins the litigation gets their attorney's fees paid by the person that loses. Most of the time, that's not going to be an option unless it's in the contract. And so that's a really good way to make sure that people are acting in good faith, because if you have to prove to them that they're not acting in good faith, they're going to have to pay your attorney for the right to pay you money because they were messing up.
A lot of small, I just want to like do a quick plug for Jordan's firm, and it's because I think it's a really important service. And you guys know I harp so much about immigration and make sure you're protected and make sure you're prepared, or personal injury, make sure you have uninsured motorist insurance. But if you're a business owner, you need to have a relationship with an attorney, and you need to have somebody review your contracts. And a lot of times, if you have somebody on a retainer, you can get a discount instead of waiting for something to go terribly wrong. At least you can constantly have someone monitor you. So I just want to put their website here, and also their YouTube channel I'll mention. He's very active and has some of his associates on the firm as well. And I know that you guys do offer a new service for like that's similar to having somebody on retainer. Jordan, if for the last few minutes you want to tell us about that, because a lot of our immigrant clients, a lot of our citizen clients own their own businesses, and how can they make sure to be prepared for not just COVID, but just for everyday business, problems.
I mean, look, anybody who's watching this and knows that they can reach out to you, they're doing that much better than the average business owner.
Mm-hmm.
The average business owner, the average person doesn't know a lawyer. And so what we've tried to do, kind of coming out of all of the quickly changing needs of COVID, is we put together a monthly subscription-based service where businesses will pay per month to have a certain amount of access. And a lot of that is going to be us working proactively, because you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't have a customer service agreement, we're going to find that out and make sure you then do have one. If you don't have employment agreements, we're going to find that out and make sure you do have them. If you have, large scale contracts with vendors, we're going to review those and see when they come up for, renegotiation and whatnot. And so a lot of people are hesitant to do that based upon money, which I totally understand, especially during this. But oftentimes we're finding a lot of business owners are more willing to spend the money now to make sure they're protected, that they have that peace of mind, that they have somebody to go to, so that they're not, stuck between a rock and a hard place in 3 months, if this is, God forbid, still going on, and their business is doing that much work.
You said about the contracts being like insurance. We have insurance to prepare for worst case scenario, and having contracts or an attorney review things might be a little bit money now, but it's to ensure that you won't have a huge expense later. So I thank you so much. Unless you have something else to add, I'll wrap up with some updates from our office. But I want to give you, if we've overlooked something, something else to share with our wonderful viewers.
Now, I appreciate you having me. I mean, we could talk about, as lawyers, I had a judge I was in front of used to say, lawyers have the ability to distill a 10-minute argument to its 3-hour essence.
Yeah.
So we could always talk even longer than that. But look, if people have questions, reach out. Anybody who lets us know they came from you or the show, they're going to get a free consultation. So at the very least, we'll go over those things. Don't be worried about, suddenly getting a bill for $700 or something crazy like that. And just, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A stitch in time saves 9. The early bird gets the worm. We have none of those idiomatic expressions that say you should wait too long to do the right thing.
Yeah. So again, Jordan, thank you. And to your wife, Heather, and Blair, please tell them I said hello. And really quick, for those who are watching, I know we have our newsletter every month that goes out. So next week, August, will go out. So if you would like to be added to that newsletter, to see our updates, to see our case list, please email me or email Jessica@mubaraklaw.com, and we'll add you to our newsletter. Immigration courts for non-detained individuals. Immigration courts, non-detained means you are not incarcerated and you are not in jail, right? Or in a detention center. These courts have been postponed now into the first week of August. Last time I was on here, it was probably July 31st, but they have continued to postpone this, obviously for everybody's safety, given the situation on COVID in Florida and throughout. Also, be on the lookout for our commercial. It will start airing on Spectrum next week. So Spectrum, some digital media, I'm really excited for you guys to see it. It has our real clients in it, some of our team members, and it's something that we've been working hard for. And I'm not sure how I forgot, because that's actually the good big news to share with you guys. And I'm happy that I could announce that with Jordan on, because he loves marketing. And like he said, if I call him for a 10-minute question, it becomes an hour-long conversation. So I thank you all again for watching, and thanks, Jordan, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everybody who took some time out to catch up on all this stuff.
Thanks, Jordan.